Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules, especially that it's finals and holiday season is approaching, to spend a little bit of time with us today. We're really excited to be with you today for our Lunch and Learn, Moving from Burnout to Vitality with Dr. Kelly Crace. And before we jump in, I did want to share a little bit of information on our esteemed guest. So just give me 1 second and I will do that. Oh, okay. So, see here. So Dr. Kelly Crace is the Associate Vice President for Health and Wellness and the Director for the Center for Mindfulness and Authentic Excellence, CMAX, at William & Mary. He is a licensed psychologist and the co-author of Authentic Excellence, Flourishing and Resilience in a Relentless World, and the Life Values Inventory. He has published and presented in the areas of values, flourishing, resilience, life role development and transition, and organizational development. He is president of Applied Psychology Resources and has conducted over 3,000 seminars for organizations. He has served as director of 2 college mental health centers at Duke University and William & Mary. He received his academic and clinical training from Vanderbilt University, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and Duke University. Kelly was the recipient of the President's Award for Service to the Community and the Chambers Reed Award for Professional Excellence at William & Mary. And so we are so excited to have Dr. Crace here today. And with that, I will turn it on over.
Thank you, Simone, and thank you for the invitation to be a part of today's conversation. And thank you to You Thrive for offering this series. I think it's a wonderful opportunity for us to learn and connect with each other during a time when we have very challenging demands. Being able to check in and learn from each other, I think, is so important. So thank you for this opportunity. And I wanted to express a level of gratitude, too, for all of your work at your universities, where you're doing tremendous work to be able to help foster a sense of well-being and wellness and vitality among the students that you serve, as well as your colleagues of faculty and staff. Because you play such a critical role, it's also critical for you to be healthy and well throughout this process. And many times we're faced with the choice of serving others, sometimes at the expense of our own wellness. How do we find a both and in this work to where we can commit and engage in things that matter to us, such as promoting the wellness of the students that are a part of our campus, while at the same time being role models and promoting our own wellness, so we can do this endurance work that takes a lot out of us, but we continue to have to do it over and over. The term burnout has been a very used term over the past few years as we have moved through the pandemic and in endemic situations and conditions. We've all been challenged. Our coping resources, our natural coping resources from 2019 have been very stretched over the past few years. And I imagine all of us at some point in time have said, I need to kind of add to my repertoire of what I'm doing, because what is being demanded of me and what I'm interacting with and how I'm being affected by my life is not quite getting it done. We've often moved from a place of stress to strain. 2019 was often earmarked by kind of feeling overworked and stressed, and we moved into the past couple of years where we have been overwhelmed and strained. Stress is not a bad thing. Stress is a function of caring. And so we want to be engaged in things that matter to us. And because of that, stress can occur. But how do we hold that stress in a healthy way? A large part of our lives right now have moved from these kind of episodic periods of too muchness to chronic too muchness. And whenever we experience these chronic levels of too muchness where demands constantly and chronically exceed resources, that's often when stress can move to strain. And it's often a time where our own neurology, our own mind, our own mindset can unintentionally work against us and cause us to move in stages of burnout. Well, my life's work for the past 33 years has really been focused on how do you predict flourishing amidst hardship, amidst life transitions, and amidst major change. Flourishing is also one of those overused terms, and it's being broadly defined in many ways. As we were defining flourishing, we didn't define it as a place of all positive feelings and functioning at your best and never being affected by anything, No, we were focusing on how do we flourish amidst hardship during times when we are affected by something. How do we still engage in things that matter to us in a healthy way? We operationally define flourishing as a consistent, not a perfect, but a consistent level of productivity, fulfillment, and resilience. So when we're flourishing, we feel like we're doing good work and things that matter. We find meaning in that work. And we find ourselves to be resilient through the hardness and harshness and sometimes unfairness of the world around that work. What does that look like? We learned a lot over the past 3 decades with our research with a very diverse group of individuals of diverse ages, of diverse backgrounds, of diverse experiences. One of the things we did learn is there's no natural born flourishers. There's also no secret island of super flourishers. People that flourish work at it. They're very mindful about it. They're very intentional about it. And the reason is because our world doesn't foster it, and our own neurology doesn't foster it. So we have to be very mindful and intentional to bring that voice, that coach forward, to be able to coach us into doing things when it's really hard. And even those other voices in our head are telling us to do something different. That's incredibly important during burnout conditions. And one of the things that I want to share with you is during 4 years, during that period of our 3 decades, there were 4 years where we specifically focused on burnout. And we're working with organizations and with individuals that were in high burnout conditions. These were our activists and our advocates. These were our social justice activists that were working in organizations where there was high turnover, a lot of burnout. These are individuals that dedicated their lives to rolling that very heavy boulder uphill every single day amidst hardship. What did organizations and individuals do in those burnout conditions to prevent burnout? Or how did they recover from burnout and move from burnout to vitality? What I want to share with you today for a few minutes is what we learned from them. And I have a loving challenge. I want to challenge you to try these strategies that I'm going to share with you every day for the next 8 weeks. And then I want to hear from you. I want you to give me a call. I'm going to give you my cell phone at the end of this. And I want you to give me a call and tell me what you notice. These strategies take less than 5 minutes a day. But these are strategies that we learn from people that are living in burnout conditions and are still able to flourish through that. I would love for you to try these and see what you notice about your own level of burnout and vitality as we move through that. But if you don't mind, if you allow me just a couple of minutes to geek out a little bit and share with you why we're vulnerable to burnout during these conditions and what do you actually do about it. So if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen quickly.
And while Kelly's doing that, please feel free to put questions in the chat. We will have dedicated time at the end, and we want this to be conversational. So please feel free to utilize that.
Thank you, Simone. I so appreciate that. So one of the things that we learned is what happens when in our brain, whenever something becomes important to us. And this was very critical in terms of the relationship between values and flourishing and values and burnout. We learned that once you care about something that matters to you or someone that matters to you, there's 3 unavoidable truths that you can't escape. The first is uncertainty. The truth is, once you care about something or someone, we know that we can never completely control that. There's always a chance we could fail or lose that thing or person of importance. And if we did, there would be a cost. We would pay a cost in some way. We also know in today's time that anytime we engage in something that matters to us, we are aware that people are watching us. And they're not watching us neutrally. They're forming opinions about us and our work as we engage in things that matter to us. So when we dare to care, we can't avoid these 3 things. And when these 3 things get activated, this is the result. It's a level of pressure that we feel. It's not danger fear, but it's that level of pressure we feel whenever we recognize that I care about something and uncertainty around that. We feel that as psychological pressure. And if we were to naturally respond to that pressure, we tend to go in one of 2 directions. We tend to either over control and master or avoid and escape until it has to be done. We learn that perfectionism and procrastination are the neurologically natural ways we cope with values-based stress, values-based fear. Why do we do this? Because it works. It actually works. This is called the fear-based model of excellence because we actually attain excellence using this model. Because if I can control everything and do everything perfectly, then I don't have to worry about failing. Or if I can sidestep this pressure until it has to be done, Well, then when it has to be done, it doesn't matter if I'm afraid. And so what we learn is we learn this way of stepping in to where our brain kicks us into a different gear out of fear, a different gear of motivation, a different gear of focus. That's why a lot of people will say, I wait till the last minute because I work better under pressure. You actually don't. But what you're feeling is that extra gear of motivation and focus. Here's the problem, and here's something that we all see day to day. This generation of young adults has the highest incidence of fear of failure than any other previous generation because of something wonderful about them. They no longer want to succeed. They want to succeed in something that matters to them. But the competition for those things that matter to them has never been more fierce. So importance is higher, uncertainty is higher, and therefore fear is higher. So by the time they reach our doorsteps, they have become specialists and experts at controlling or avoiding their way to excellence. The problem is the fear-based model of excellence eventually hits a ceiling effect and an increasing cost. We reach a point where it starts to work against us. Our inability to perfectly control everything around us, or our inability to pull it off at the last minute, starts to have an increasing cost on us. And what happens is that starts to get in the way and causes a plateau effect that actually moves stress to strain. So the reason for that is it's actually whenever you start to lead with fear, from this values-based fear, we move into a need state. And what we're needing is reassurance that everything is going to be okay. We'll look for that reassurance by focusing very intently on outcomes. How did it go today? Thinking really, looking for relief, looking for reassurance. We put a lot of stock on our experiences of the day, which causes our brain to turn on and start keeping score. And it creates this chronically evaluative mindset where you're constantly evaluating, how am I doing now? How about now compared to yesterday? How about now compared to Simone, compared to me? We get very comparative and we get very regular in that evaluation. In fact, a chronically evaluative mindset is one of the leading causes of insomnia today, where we quiet the body at the end of the night and the brain turns on and starts replaying that day. And it never replays the day neutrally. It always punctuates it in some kind of judgment. And so we were fascinated in looking at this dynamic that causes a level of strain in our life. It's a human thing. We all do it. We're wired for it. What do we do about it? And so especially when we were looking at individuals that were in, this is all amplified during transition and it's amplified during burnout conditions. What do we do about that? And so we became fascinated with one, what predicts flourishing, but then when we learned that and what gets in the way of flourishing, but also can you train it? Can you train to move from fear-based excellence, a fear-based excellence model, to authentic excellence model, where authentic excellence is defined by excellence as defined by engaging in things that matter to me, but holding that in a healthy way. What does that look like? That deeper level of productivity, fulfillment, and resilience, especially during burnout conditions. So here's the loving challenge. We found that people that are in burnout conditions that flourished, they were very mindful about three major things every day. They reminded themselves of these three things. They worked at it every day. And it is work. The work of wellness is just that. We don't shy away from the work of wellness. You cannot be passively healthy in our world today. So how do we mindfully do this work and engage in it? Well, they focused on three major things, and then periodically they'd focus on three little things. And so I've termed them the essential nourishment and the essential seasonings. The essential nourishment of those three foundational things that we need to focus on. And the essential seasonings are, if you can sprinkle this every day on those things, it adds to the richness and robustness and power of that. But before I get into those three things, I have two questions that I want you to focus on, two reflective questions. These are very unfair questions, by the way, but you can imagine anything. First question, if you could only be remembered for one thing, which is totally unfair because you're going to be remembered for a lot of things, but if you could only be remembered for one thing, one characteristic, one quality, what would you want that to be? And why? Reflect on that, clarify what that is for just a moment. If you could only be remembered for one thing, like when I remember Simone, the only thing I remember about Simone is this. What would she hope I would say? and why? By the way, this is not a tombstone question. This can be someone that enters your life for a week. What would you hope they would remember about you if they could only remember one thing about you after spending a week with you? Second question. Got the first one? Second question. If you could actually be remembered for two things, what would be the second thing you would add to the first? And are they related? Are they related to each other in some way? Are they completely different, separate? That's okay. Or do they complement each other to where they kind of raise the elevation of both? If you could be remembered for two things, what would be the second thing you add to the first? So here's the essential nourishment. Here's three things that I want you to try every day. Takes less than 5 minutes. Every day. Start off every day with this question. What opportunities are there for me to practice the two things that I said I want to be remembered for? And most importantly, be realistic with your time and energy. There may be one day that when you wake up and ask that question, the answer may be, I could step into this for 30 seconds. I could just think about this for 30 seconds because the rest of the day, I have a lot of other important things that are a part of my life. But there might be another day when you can say, I can step into these two things all day. I could immerse myself into these two things. But start off every day with this question. What opportunities are there for me to practice today the two things I want to be remembered for, and be realistic with your time and energy? The power of that first step. Human beings are most naturally motivated by fear and comfort. But the deepest form of human motivation that overrides fear and fatigue are our values, but only if we have a relationship with them. Values clarification, what my values are, fear and comfort will override that. But if I move from what my values are to how are my values alive in my life? How am I engaged in my values in my life? That moves us to more of a purpose-centered, deeper level of motivation. So we override fear and comfort with purpose. Second step, when you actually step into those two things during the day, practice them with complete experiential acceptance. Step into those two things with complete experiential acceptance. You may want a good outcome, that's just fine, but you completely accept what happens. The power of that step is it moves to start to transform how you define self-esteem and success in your life. Human beings think of engagement and experience. And during burnout conditions, we can start to give more power to the success of ourselves and who we are as a person by what we're experiencing in life. And that matters. Engagement matters, experience matters. Engagement has to matter more. And during burnout conditions, we have to be mindful about pouring the worth and the value into engagement. So how that looks when we're flourishing is that we define our worth by the engagement in things that matter to us, and the outcomes are just the mood of the day, where our emotions and mood can fluctuate by what happens, but our worth stays level, our sense of success stays level. And the last step, which is the most neglected step, by the way, at the end of the day, take time at the end of the day to appreciate and value how you practice those two things, even if it was for a minute, with no buts allowed. No buts allowed. You can't say, well, I did it for an hour, but I could have done it for 2. Well, I did this, but I could have done it so much better. No. Take a moment and practice appreciation and valuing for how you courageously stepped in to those two things that matter to you the most, that you most want to be remembered for. What's the power of this step? Very simply, it transforms purpose into meaning. A lot of people think purpose and meaning are the same thing. They're slightly different. Purpose is motivational. Meaning is reflective. And we have to take time to reflect on what matters to us and our engagement in it for it to actually have an impact on our life. And that was the tipping point with these amazing flourishers in burnout conditions. Here's what their narrative was. I am exhausted most days. And I am heartbroken most days. And they said this with complete authenticity, and I'm living a life of meaning. And they didn't say it as a cliche. They didn't say it as a platitude. They said it with honesty because they were reflecting about the meaning in their life every single day. This is different than a gratitude journal. Gratitude journals are wonderful things. I highly recommend them. But gratitude journals tend to drift into being grateful for things that have happened to me. Instead, you want to focus in addition, you also want to take time and appreciate where you courageously stepped in to those two things. The reason I use the word courageous is because this is hard. It's simple, but it's hard to do. And that's what courage is. Stepping into something that's right for us, that's hard. That's courage. One of my favorite quotes from Dr. King is he said, heroism is the courage to act every day according to your values. That's heroic. And we need to do these mindful actions to do that. So the essential nourishment is essentially stepping into purpose every day, engagement with acceptance, and being intentional about how we're reflective in the meaning that it has in our life. The essential seasonings, very simply, every day, step into something enjoyable. You're never too busy to do that, even if it's for 30 seconds. Step into something enjoyable. Every day, step into something healthy. And every day, and this was a surprise to us from our research, every day, step into both giving and receiving encouragement. So, I look forward to hearing from you in 8 weeks. I want you to give this a try in 8 weeks. Why 8 weeks? Neuroplasticity research suggests that it takes about 15 weeks of intentional mindfulness around something we want to change in our life, a few minutes every day for about 15 weeks for neurological changes to actually occur. I want to hear from you halfway through and to see what you notice. And so with that in mind, I want you to please make a note of how you can reach me through email or cell phone. And I want to lead you to an open educational resource. That's the link that's at the bottom of the slide there, lifevaluesinventory.org. All of this information, if you're interested in kind of going a little deeper or understanding it more, we have an open educational resource that's free and open and available to the public for you to look at. And I also look forward to getting feedback about your use of that and however way you seem most relevant. Simone, thank you so much for the time. I look forward to answering any questions or comments or responses from the chat room, if I may. And I'll stop sharing my screen if that's okay.
Thank you so much, Kelly, for this very thought-provoking, as well as providing us with tangible tools that we can take back and use and try. And for everybody, I did put that link in the chat, and I definitely encourage you to check it out. I've had the opportunity to do so, and there's some really wonderful information there. So with that, we'd love to open it up if anybody has any questions for Dr. Crace or wants to learn a little bit more. So if you can do me a favor, and what was an individual asked, what was the Dr. King quote again?
Oh, thank you. Yes, Dr. King said his quote was, heroism is the courage to act every day according to your values. That's not just something we should strive for, that's actually heroic to actually do that. Because while it's simple to understand, it's hard to do. The noise of that can really get in the way. And especially the reason why that's so important too, if I may, Simone, for just a minute,
Yeah,
in burnout conditions, the reason why this quote is so important is during burnout conditions, two voices become very prominent in our mind. We essentially have three voices in our head. Well, for many of us like me, I have more than three voices in my head, but we have at least three. Two voices during burnout really become prominent. That one voice is the inner guardian. And the inner guardian is that voice in our head that it only cares about one thing. And that is for you to be safe and comfortable. That's all it cares about, is being safe and comfortable. And it doesn't matter how it gets you to do that, but it compels you to do that, even if it's unhealthy, even if it's through avoidance or escapism, it only cares about you being safe. But there's another voice, and that's the inner critic. And the inner critic never lets you off the hook. It always has this vision of your ideal self, and it's constantly chirping at you as to why you're not attaining that. So you have this inner guardian, and during burnout conditions, both become very prominent because the inner critic never lets you off the hook and actually gets very loud because it sees that you're affected by burnout and it wants you to still keep pushing forward, while the inner guardian is only saying, just be safe, just take care of yourself. What we're wanting to promote is the inner coach. And the inner coach is this very wise voice that all of us have, but it has perfect timing as to be able to tell you, it knows right when to challenge you in a loving way, to push you beyond what you think you can do, but it's in a loving way of saying, you can do this, you've got this, this matters to you, engage in this. And it also knows when to put its arm around you and says, this is really hard. Let's take a break. Let's get some rest. It knows when to support you and knows when to challenge you. Think of those best coaches that have been able to do that in our lives. You have that within you, but we have to be very mindful and intentional to pull that inner coach forward when the inner critic and the inner guardian are very loud. I hope that's helpful. Any other questions or comments, Simone?
We had an individual ask if the PowerPoint will be shared. Is that something that you would be willing to
Yeah, I'm
provide
happy
us
to.
with?
Yeah, I'm
Awesome.
happy, and I can just share that to you. I'll send that to you, and feel free to share
Perfect.
that out, please.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Another individual said, I love the idea about having an inner coach.
Yeah, and then that's really our wisdom. Our wisdom knows that, and the things that get in our wisdom, get in the way of our wisdom, is fear and hurt and things that happen, and the things that we've been through over the past few years. They are scary, they are hurtful. We've all experienced loss in various things, and change is stressful in our lives. How do we bring that very loving coach that knows how to pull our resources forward? That's very, very important. It's also that aspect of burnout, of being able to look about kind of stages of burnout. What we've learned in our research is there's these various stages of burnout. The first stage is staleness, to where there's kind of diminished joy and diminished motivation. And then it moves from staleness to overtraining, to where there's actually performance deficits, in that we're actually not doing as well as we normally would, not as productive, yet we're trying harder. It's like the harder we try, the worse it gets. And then it moves into burnout, where it's actually clinical, where there's actually changes going on in the body around that, such as an elevated resting heart rate. I noticed there was something in the chat just briefly, it came up about DBT and some similarities. Yes, there's a lot of principles and components from DBT around emotional self-regulation and the dialectics that we bring together in terms of both and thinking and narratives in our mind that are very complementary to this work. We found that a lot of the work we were doing in flourishing and what we were learning from people were very complementary to some of the DBT principles, ACT principles, positive psychology, and other theoretical formulations. So they seem to be very complementary.
Melissa also asked, if you have personal goals that may not be exactly what we may want to be remembered for, how do we align those with this approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. Wonderful question. What you want to think about is, are these goals, think along the continuum of want, values, and needs. So value-centered goals are kind of the sweet spot where we flourish. But there's a continuum of where we are, where certain goals can come up that might be a goal in terms of, but it's more of a want. Like it might be important for me to be fit. But if it's at a want level, if it's at a preference level, there's not the psychological commitment behind that. And so we're not consistent with it. But also it can move to a need level. And whenever something becomes a need, like I need to be fit, I move from valuing achievement to needing achievement, or valuing belonging to needing to belong. And when that happens, there becomes an intensity about it that gets in our way, because it moves into a level of psychological press. So the first thing you want to ask is this important to me, either at a primary level or at an indirect level? For instance, someone might be imposing a goal on me. I may work for a supervisor that is saying, this is important for us as an organization. We all need to have this goal. And I may be saying, well, it's not really important to me, but I may have a value of responsibility to where it is important for me to be dependable and trustworthy with my colleagues. And so for that, I look for the meaning in this goal. While I may not have a personal preference or value to me specifically, there's a second order value of dependability or concern for others that I can tap into. If you tap into that meaning piece, and that's what's so important, there needs to be a values congruency with our goals in order to move into this deeper level of purpose and meaning. And so that's what you want to look for.
Wonderful. And I know we are basically at time. And again, we are so grateful for your willingness to be here with us today, Dr. Crace, and everybody else. And I did just want to let everybody know that if you are interested in learning a little bit more about You Thrive Educational Services and how you can use similar tools and skills to support college student mental and emotional wellness, we are having a 30-minute informational session tomorrow on our programs from 12 to 12:30 Eastern. I did put the registration link in the chat, and we hope to see you there. And if not there, then at future events that we host. And wishing everybody a really safe, happy, and healthy holiday season and new year. And we look forward to being in touch. Thank you so much again, Kelly.
Thank you, Simone. It's a pleasure to be here, and wish all of you the best.